In this tutorial, we will talk about camera matching, and we'll take a closer look at how it functions. So let's start. And so, as you can see, we have a grid here. And the first thing we need to understand at this point is camera tool. Now, if I show hidden files here, you will see helper grid. And you will also notice that it's at 0. When I click here and drag, you see that it's changing position of the grid. So this means that we're moving the grid and not the actual perspective. And because we need the grid to stay in place while we move and look at it from different angles, we can use camera tool. It's right here in the tools menu and it has 3 options. So if I select first one and then click and drag, you'll see that we can spin the grid, but that doesn't change its position. And this is because we're moving the camera and not the actual object. Now, if I select the second option and drag it, you will see that the camera moves along X and Y. All the meanwhile, the grid doesn't go anywhere. And then if I select third option, the camera starts to move only along the Z. So in older versions, there was the unified camera feature, which was kind of a mixture of all of these 3. But in more up-to-date versions, this button isn't in the tools menu. But if you hold Alt and then left click and drag, the camera will rotate around the grid or the cursor. Or similarly, when you hold Alt and do the middle click, it moves along both X and Y. And then if you right click and drag, this will make it go along the Z. Alright, so I think that explains it well. And now let's create some object. By holding Alt and pressing all 3 buttons, I can move, spin, and dolly around the object. As you can see, we're moving the camera, not the object, which is still and remains in place, right in the center of our grid. Okay, good. So now let's talk about what is camera matching. Camera matching adjusts the viewpoint of the camera in a way that its perspective in the scene matches the background image perspective. And this also allows you to put 3D objects as if they were part of your background image, which is very convenient. So now we need to match the camera to this image. To make things clearer, I'll draw some lines on the image. And although it seems that the lines sort of intersect, they are in fact parallel to one another. And the reason for that is vanishing point. So let's go ahead and match our camera to make our grid lines match those lines over here. So I simply press match camera and I'm ready to start adjusting it using camera tool. We can already see that the lines don't match. Now, obviously, I need my grid line to follow the perch line up there. And while we're at it, I should also point out one thing about focal length. So if you're struggling to match your camera and you don't seem to get anywhere, you should first of all try changing the focal length. So you double click here, and in the camera setup, you will see that it's set to 28mm by default. And this picture was taken by a camera with a lower focus. So to fix this, we need to reduce the camera's focal length. The perfect focal length for this image would actually be 26mm. As you can see, all the lines match perfectly now. Well, almost perfectly, because it's actually impossible to match the camera perfectly because of the so-called lens distortion. Of course, you could open F-Spy and match your camera with very high precision there, but in this tutorial we will do things kind of manually. And you will see that we can still get excellent results. As you can see, we've almost perfected it. Now we can select our image and camera and create a projection. So we're done with lines, and now let's check if we matched our camera correctly. I'm gonna double click second projection scene. Let's create a ground plane to generate position for our house. I'm gonna uncheck back and left, and I'm gonna create ground plane. Generate position. Now let's create a cube primitive at the selected position. Open anchor point editor and mark a reposition only anchor point. That will help you to move the object to the correct position. Now if you scale the cube, you'll see how it almost perfectly covers the entire house. This is because we matched the camera properly. Uncheck scale on all axes, and we'll do it separately. And now our 3D properly covers object in the picture, like it's a part of the background image. And when you match the camera properly, it's easier to create a scene and the result will be amazing. Okay, now let's match the camera to another image. This one also has lines that you can use to match the camera. These are y-axis lines, and those are x-axis ones. So let's match camera and we can start adjusting. You can see that the lines along x-axis don't coincide, so you need to reduce the focal length. Let's reduce it to 20 millimeters. Okay, not so bad, but we still need the focal length of the actual camera, so let's reduce it to 15 millimeters. Okay, great. Now all the lines match the image perfectly, both along x and y axis. Now look, let me create a ground plane to show you something. Let's make it bigger. I'll draw a red line, and if everything's done correctly, moving the camera, we'll see that this line perfectly matches all the lines in the image. So let's create a mask. Add a stroke effect. Change color. And mark all masks. Also change original image to transparent. Now look, if everything's right, then when we move along X with our camera tool, the red line should match all parallel of the lines on the image along Y. You see, the line perfectly matches all the lines of this image. That's just great. Okay, now let's draw another line along x-axis. See if it matches. Yep, as you can see, it matches perfectly. And it even perfectly covers the roof line there. All lines are parallel, and no matter where we move our camera now, the red line matches perfectly well. Even here. And that's what we want. Now that the camera's aligned, you can finally create a projection. Okay, so let's delete this and create a projection. Okay, great. Now let's create some kind of object. First, generate a position. Add a cup primitive. Open anchor point editor and mark a reposition only anchor point. Move the object to the correct position. Okay, press S on the keyboard to open the scale parameter, disable scaling on all axes, and adjust the model. See? When the cameras matched correctly, the models cover the image perfectly. And I'll drag this over to another object. That's perfect. This one as well. Great. But it's not all that simple with the house, because there's a lens distortion in the background. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's generate a position, add a cup primitive, as you can see, the model is distorted, so a cube primitive isn't exactly what we need here. But there's another way. Let's go ahead and generate a second position for the house. Select both position controllers, head over to Tools menu, and choose Generate Plane from Points. Alright, now scale the plane. As you probably have already guessed, we can now draw a mask and get the front wall off the house. When we look at it now, we can see that the plane covers that house perfectly well, and there's no distortion of any kind anymore. Of course, in this manner, you can create objects and scenes where the camera is badly matched, but if you match the camera correctly, you'll only have to do the very minimum to make the objects in the scene move correctly during animation. Alright, now let's move on to the last example. As you can see, there are no orientation lines in this image. So what do we do in this situation? In this instance, you have to match the camera by sort of imagining the lines. So you're going to have to use your imagination. Imagine the angle from which the picture was taken and match the camera. Maybe in this scene we'll need a different focal length. In scenes like these, for the ground plane helper grid bottom, always select the lowest point of ground in the image. Okay, this seems fine. Now we can probably say that the camera is matched more or less correctly. Now take a look at how I matched the camera. Well, here I think it's easier. And that's how it suits me. Alright, well that's all guys. I hope this tutorial was useful for you, and now you understand how to match the camera before creating a projection.